Welcome to the Synthetic Media Podcast. I'm your host, Henry Ajder. Join me for interviews and thoughts on the ever-expanding topic of synthetic media. You can find my book on synthetic media on Amazon. Subscribe to this podcast for free. Follow us on syntheticmediapodcast.com and enjoy today's episode.
My name's Henry Ajder. I'm head of policy and partnerships at Ep18, which is a company creating hyperreal synthetic media technologies. And I'm also a leading expert on deepfakes and the synthetic media ecosystem, which is a space I've been doing research and advising in for the last 4 years.
Henry, how are you involved with synthetic media?
So I've been involved with synthetic media since early 2018. Firstly, as a researcher, trying to map the synthetic media and deepfake landscape as it evolved. I wrote the first report providing that mapping called The State of Deepfakes back in 2019, whilst working for the world's first deepfake detection company, DeepTrace, now known as Sensity. And I've continued to do that research both at Sensity, independently, and with Ep18, mapping both malicious uses, specifically looking at things such as deepfake image abuse and cybersecurity threats, but also more recently looking towards how we can shape synthetic media as a creative and commercially useful tool that is responsibly and ethically implemented. And that's one of the key priorities that we have at Ep18, is to shepherd and lead the way with the responsible implementation of synthetic media. So I work both in an advisory capacity to different stakeholders, from governments to businesses to news media organizations to corporate entities, and then also in my capacity at Ep18 and at Synthetic Futures, which is our new kind of community initiative, which is trying to bring together all the stakeholders who are invested in building a positive future for synthetic media, and celebrating its creative and ethical use, to us also addressing its malicious and harmful ones.
Henry, what are the biggest challenges and successes you've seen with synthetic media?
So I think the biggest challenges I've seen with synthetic media, and this is something which I've explored extensively throughout my research in various different places and in different reports, by far and away at the moment is the very gendered problem of non-consensual image abuse, or what's commonly referred to as deepfake pornography. I try to avoid that phrase because I think pornography typically infers consent, whereas obviously these cases where people are swapping female celebrities' faces into pornographic footage or synthetically stripping images of women are inherently non-consensual and forms of effectively digital sexual violence. For all of the noise that's been made around deepfakes and synthetic media posing a significant risk to information ecosystems and the cybersecurity realm, by far and away the biggest problem that is demonstrable and its impact is being felt by millions already is in the image abuse space, where women are being targeted. So that by far and away is the biggest challenge to me. My research has found tools which are increasingly accessible and realistic for generating these outputs, and it's very, very hard to see how we can effectively counter the use of the technology in this way, especially because these tools are now open source, they're easily replicable, and so it's a significant challenge. I was aware of the first kind of place where the term deepfakes was used, are deepfakes, back in late 2017. And I've been mapping it ever since. And I think one of the things that's been striking to me from a positive perspective is that by far and away the most progress and the most change I've seen really over the last at least 2 years in particular has been the exciting creative and commercial uses of synthetic media that really show the technology, at least in some applications, is maturing quite rapidly. And so those are things like, use in film. We've seen Disney, using face swapping in Hollywood kind of blockbuster style films, and in documentaries such as in Welcome to Chechnya, where persecuted Chechen gay individuals had their face swapped to protect their identity in the film but preserve their humanity. All the way through to some of the work that other companies are doing in the space around creating kind of avatars and realistic synthetic voices, maybe for people who've lost the ability to speak, or for people who want to preserve their voice for future generations, or for people who want to be able to express themselves in a way that their organic voice does not allow them to. So I think, the big successes for me is that the technology on the whole is maturing quite rapidly. I'll caveat that though by saying that I think synthetic media is an inherently disruptive technology, even if it follows in the tradition of media manipulation or media editing technologies. And despite these really exciting and cool applications of the tech, we need to be cautious, or at least mindful of what the unexpected consequences or impacts of these technologies could be later down the line that we can't forecast very well now. And I think that's one of the kind of the key things that all people working in the space need to keep in mind, is that, what could your technology do if it gets in the wrong hands? How can you make sure it doesn't get in the wrong hands? What impact could this have, even if it's used as intended, when it combines with other technologies or social or cultural factors? So yeah, lots of really exciting successes, but I think we just need to have that respect for the technologies we're working with.
Henry, what advice would you like to share with people working on synthetic media?
I think one of the key pieces of advice I would give is think not about the short term, not even think about the medium term, but think about the long term of how the technologies you're developing could be embedded or interact with other technologies in both the kind of technological and social ecosystems that we all live in different countries. Again, we live in a very Western-centric kind of tech perspective, at least here in the UK, and I'm sure in the US too. How could these technologies be used in, parts of Africa or in Southeast Asia? What are the cultural traditions that these technologies may have friction with or butt up against? Synthetic resurrection being one which is really interesting. That's one that people in the West feel uncomfortable about in some contexts, but in other contexts, it could be violating, tribal traditions or cultural traditions. So I think, again, just trying to have that nuanced perspective on the technologies you're developing, but also trying to understand, I think, where the boundary between inevitable attempts to misuse your tech and then being too lax on safety measures, right? I think we all recognize that if someone really wants to misuse a piece of technology, they're going to ultimately find a way. And I think there are tools that are explicitly designed for misuse, right? Such as image abuse tools that synthetically strip images is explicitly a malicious piece of technology. But there are other forms of the technology, right, which maybe have restrictions, as in the case of face swapping, who you can swap your face onto, what scenes you can swap into, or whose faces you can use. And those are some good examples of some pretty good safety measures. And if someone were to try and find a way to misuse that tool, I think we would perhaps sympathize with the creators and saying, well, they did the best they could, but ultimately, if someone wants to do it, they're going to do it. On the flip side, there are people who are developing tools which are very lazy with their approach to safety measures, and perhaps we think differently about the misuse of that tool if it were to be misused, which is, well, you didn't do enough. So I think that's one other thing to keep in mind, is keep in mind that balance between creating a tool that people enjoy using and is powerful and delivers on the exciting and creative content that you want people to use it for, and also protecting individuals from being targeted by it maliciously.
Henry, where can we learn more about synthetic media and your work on the subject?
There are loads of different resources kind of emerging around synthetic media. And obviously it's a hot topic, which is only going to become more relevant and more present in everyday life. I would certainly point people towards Synthetic Futures. That's our community initiative we've established at Metaphysic, which is bringing together all of the different stakeholders in the synthetic media space, from the companies to the NGOs, to the activists, to the artists, all the different people who are interested in using the technology and who talk about it and share their thoughts in our events and in our community Discord and through blog posts, for example. So that's something that will be a really rich resource collection. I'd also point people towards some of my research, particularly looking at misuses. I think it's, even though it's some of it is slightly old now, I think the broad trends that I identified in those reports remain the same, which is increasing accessibility means more and more people have access for both better and for worse, and also around some of the key categories for misuse. I would also point people to my friend and colleague Nina Schick's book on deepfakes. I think that's a really nice, accessible introduction into the space. And then I think the last one I'd point people to from a kind of a more technical perspective is Argo Vision, which is an Italian company who published a lot of the latest papers kind of working on generative synthetic media tech. And including videos and illustrations of how it works, which I think is a really nice way for people to see what's on the cutting edge, right? Like it takes a while for what comes out with CVPR, to trickle down to kind of consumer tech typically. And so keeping abreast of that is important, and Argo Vision do a really good job of kind of synthesizing that whole collection of papers and research.
Join us next week for a new episode by subscribing to the Synthetic Media Podcast. Check out my book about synthetic media on Amazon. Follow us on syntheticmediapodcast.com. This podcast was produced by Henry Ajder. Music by Mattia Capelli. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. And thank you for listening.